Humanity loves to group things in threes. The Holy Trinity, the three wise monkeys who see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, the fast food combo of a Big Mac, fries, and a soda, the championship Boston Celtics team of 2008 with Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, and Ray Allen. Bad things come in threes, but the third time is the charm. Rock, paper, scissors. Choosing your starter Pokemon. I could do this all day. Ever since the early 2010s, rap fans have been speaking of a big three in hip hop. When they do this, they usually refer to Kendrick Lamar, Drake, and J. Cole. The order of those three is up for debate, and boy, do people love debating it. Who can blame them? Rap is a lot like sports, where people just can't seem to ever get enough of having the exact same debate over and over and over again. And much like sports, there are many different stats and attributes to rank artists by, and argue over, of course. Some are more objective and data-based, like sales, charts, and tour size. Others are more based on feeling and emotion, and thus are arguably more open to debate and also more fun to argue about. Lyrical ability, number of classic albums, whatever that means. The concept of the big three has been back, front and center, in the discourse ever since Kendrick got on Future's song, Like That, where amongst other shots at Drake and J. Cole, he says, "Motherfuck the big three, it's just big me." So in this video, I want to look at how exactly we ended up with this big three classification that has been running the meta of rap discussion for over a decade now. How did these three get chosen? Is this classification justified? Or does it depend on which criteria you're using to judge a rapper? Are there other artists we should be looking at for these spots? Are you high right now? Do you ever get nervous? Are you subscribed to the channel? For real though, thank you guys so much for all the support that I've gotten on the channel so far. We are almost at 2,000 subscribers. That's crazy to me. If you ever want to see a video early, go to my Instagram, HADJI, follow me on there, and join my broadcast channel. In that broadcast channel, I post every video a day early before I drop them here. Also, I'm dropping a song on April 10th called Kick It Like We Used To. If you want to pre-save it, you can check out the link in the description. Alright, back to the video. The thing about the big three discussion is it wasn't really a thing before the Drake, Kendrick, and J. Cole era, which begins around 2009 or so. Before we get into that, we have to look back at the history of the genre, which predates their rise by 30 or so years. In the 90s, I feel like rap is better classified in the head-to-head clashes we got. The Jay-Z versus Nas, the Biggie versus Pac, the East Coast versus the West Coast at a larger scale. Depending on what years you use as start and end points, you can add people in like Snoop Dogg, DMX, LL Cool J, Dr. Dre, and Eminem, and Ice Cube. So obviously there were rappers who were unbelievably commercially successful. But this idea of a big three wasn't the framework that people were commonly using. Like I mentioned in the intro, the big three classification has a very strong tie to basketball. In the early 2000s, the San Antonio Spurs put Tim Duncan, Manu Ginobili, and Tony Parker on a team together and went on to win 5 championships. It became a bigger thing and a bigger narrative in the late 2000s when the Boston Celtics went and put KG and Ray Allen together with Paul Pierce and won the 2008 championship. That set the framework for probably the biggest big three, which was when LeBron James and Chris Bosh decided to take their talents to South Beach to the Miami Heat and join Dwayne Wade, where they went on to win 2 championships. Later in the 2010s, Kevin Durant decided to join Steph Curry and Klay Thompson in Golden State, and they won a chip. KD tried the same thing again in Brooklyn with the Nets, with Kyrie Irving and James Harden, but it just didn't hit the same. You might be saying, well, what the hell does all this basketball talk have to do with rappers? Well, the cultures of basketball and rap music are so deeply intertwined that a lot of the ways we discuss rappers and rap music is informed by the ways that we discuss sports. I mean, we're going to talk a lot about Drake. He himself said, sports and music are so synonymous because we want to be them and they want to be us. And basketball in particular is especially associated with hip hop. I mean, all 3 of the rappers in this video have deep connections with the sport of basketball. J. Cole was professionally, semi-pro, whatever, playing internationally like just a couple years ago. And almost all of his projects have a name that's related to sports somehow. Friday Night Lights, The Warm-Up, The Off-Season. We can't forget that Drake was an integral member of the Kentucky Wildcats basketball team, and he loves hanging out with the Toronto Raptors. Kendrick wrote an entire song about a deep-cut NBA player named Aaron Aflalo. And also, his cousin is Nick Young, who played a bunch of years in the NBA, but unfortunately for him is probably most famous for cheating on Iggy Azalea and that gif where he misses the three-pointer and turns around. It only makes sense that these rappers are compared to each other the way that we often compare athletes, because the cultures are so intrinsically linked. Now, if you're a basketball fan watching this and you're like, hey, big trios in the NBA existed before the San Antonio Spurs, that's definitely true, but what I'm talking about is the narrative around discussing big threes. This video is more about discourse than it is about actual hard facts, and so we sometimes have to throw like logic out of the window. Not the rapper. They started calling the late 2000s, early 2010s in the NBA the Big Three era for a reason. It's more of a thing now than it ever was, even if some NBA teams were starting 3 stars at the same time in the past. That's enough basketball talk. But by that logic, there may have been combinations of 3 rappers that you could have called the Big Three in the 90s, or maybe in the early 2000s with some combination of guys like 50 Cent, Eminem, Nelly, Kanye West, Lil Wayne, whoever. But I guess what makes the Drake, Kendrick, and J. Cole Big Three narrative so compelling to so many people is that they all kind of came up around the same time and with similar enough circumstances. So let's dig into that come up, no pun intended. We can start with Drake, who of course was already in the public eye if you were a fan of Canadian teen dramas, starring on the show Degrassi. There are more intense deep dives on Drake's career that could be done than what I'm going to do in this video. So Poppy's Angels, take it easy on me. I'll try to zoom out on the timeline a little bit. His rap career really started to take shape in 2007 with his mixtape Comeback Season. Around the same time, J. Cole gave us his 2000 mixtape The Come Up. Funny how they both have come in the title.
Hey, yo!
I actually never noticed that until now. Kendrick didn't really start joining this race until 2009 or 2010. Both Drake and Cole really took their careers to the next level in 2009. Drake gave us So Far Gone, which built upon his backpack lyrical rapper style and started infusing some more of that moody, ethereal R&B that we kind of know him for. It really helped make him a star with a singular sound, and that happened a little bit earlier than it did for Kendrick or J. Cole. His song Best I Ever Had peaked at number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100, so he had no problems crossing over into the mainstream music world. Thanks to that early career hit, he released his debut album a little bit earlier than the other 2 guys did. Thank Me Later dropped in 2010, and it did 447,000 copies in its first week, and a star was born. J. Cole's career took a slightly different path. In June 2009, he released his mixtape The Warm Up, and announced that he was signing to Jay-Z's label Roc Nation, giving him the huge rapper cosign, and thus casting a rather large shadow on everything that he did. He inherited that title of Next. He was developing a fan base at the time that would probably jump off a bridge if you told him to, but the industry didn't really have a way to quantify that off mixtape downloads at that time. In that era, the late 2000s, early 2010s, everybody was still kind of figuring out the role that the internet played in music, believe it or not. The hip-hop side of music and music as a whole were really focused on the radio single. That was the only way to truly see if an artist was ready to break through or not. So J. Cole tried his hardest to make some radio singles. Much like the Drake timeline, the J. Cole timeline could be its own video, and if you really want me to do something like that, like I was a really big Cole fan in that time, and I think I could probably do it pretty well, but just let me know in the comments if that's something you want to see. At first, his attempt at a single was Who Dat in June 2010, which in reality was more of like a street single. It was lyrical and kind of fiery, but it wasn't like a radio hit. So the label told him, nah, it's not gonna cut it. Go back in there and give us a real radio hit. So in 2011, he returned with Workout, which at almost 1 billion streams today, accomplished that goal. The song peaked at number 13 on the Billboard charts, but not until January 2012, 7 months after its initial release. So J. Cole went into his album release month, September of 2011, without a real hit single. Even though Workout was already out, it just hadn't taken off. When he dropped his album, most of the industry expected lukewarm numbers. So when the album sold 218,000 copies in its first week, easily going number 1, it surprised everyone, including Roc Nation themselves. Cole would later go on to explain, on the song Cole Summer, the label didn't even think the album was gonna do that well, but he recouped his deal in the first week. Recouped, by the way, for those of us who aren't musicians in the room, means to make back the money that the label gave you for the album. So just as a sidebar, if a label signs an artist for $1 million, it means that artist is gonna have to generate $1 million worth of revenue just to make that back. Artists sometimes spend years trying to recoup those big deals. So doing it in your first week means you really blew expectations out of the water. What makes this moment so significant is J. Cole, in a lot of ways, was one of the first internet rappers without a smash hit to cross over and move a lot of units with an album. This is one of the first moments that the industry realized that having a dedicated fan base on the internet could translate to real life sales. And going the traditional radio route was not what fans nor what the artists themselves usually wanted to do. And clearly it wasn't required anymore. This is important context for when we see Kendrick start to make his impact. Kendrick dropped his mixtape Overly Dedicated in 2010 and started getting placed in a similar circle as the other blog era rappers, including Drake and J. Cole. In fact, with J. Cole, the two of them were friends and collaborated on at least 2 unreleased songs around that time that had snippets on the internet that are kind of legendary but never dropped. J. Cole also produced Kendrick's single High Power in 2011, which came from his album Section 80. Unlike Cole's and Drake's first albums, Section 80 was independently released. However, Kendrick's real major label debut was just 1 year behind, and Good Kid, Mad City was released in the fall of 2012. The rollout was somewhat similar to Cole's, at least success-wise. The first intended lead single was The Recipe with Dr. Dre, but it didn't quite break through to the mainstream, and it only made it onto the deluxe version of the album, just like Cole's Who Dat. The more commercial single, Swimming Pools, dropped that summer, and kinda like Workout, it took a second before it really took off. It was a slow burner, but it eventually peaked at number 17 on the Billboard charts, but after 13 weeks. The album sold 242,000 copies in its first week, and unlike Drake's and J. Cole's debut albums, it's widely considered to be a classic. By the end of 2012, all three of them were clearly on a path to stardom. They weren't alone. Other rappers like Big Sean and Wale were surging in popularity in a similar lane, one that straddles the mainstream and the hip-hop world, providing labels and radios with hits when they needed them, but feeding their fan bases with lyrics and concepts and bars, all that good stuff. It would be the next few years that would truly separate these three from the pack, at least in my opinion. Drake wasted no time, as his second album, Take Care, came out in 2011, still a year before Kendrick's proper major label debut album. He dropped his third album, Nothing Was the Same, in 2013, the same year as Cole's second album, Born Sinner. Take Care and Nothing of the Same are two of Drake's most beloved projects, and both featured bona fide hit songs. Born Sinner featured Power Trip, which kinda like Workout was a slow burner but ended up being a hit. It came out in March and didn't peak on the charts until it hit number 19 in July, which was a month after Born Sinner actually came out. But Born Sinner was well received by Cole's core audience, and in 2014, he blew those expectations out of the water again with 2014 Forest Hills Drive. It's widely considered to be his best project, maybe not to Cole fans, but definitely to hip-hop fans as a whole, and it's his closest to a classic album depending on who you're asking. All of this took place between Kendrick's first and second albums. It might have been the critical reception that he got for Good Kid, Mad City, which was leagues above what the other two were getting for their albums, that allowed Kendrick to take his time a bit. But when he finally delivered To Pimp a Butterfly in 2015, it was clear that he made the right call. Moving in a slightly more organic direction with the production, adding a lot of really talented jazz instrumentalists to the mix, the album further solidified his legacy and gave us a protest classic with Alright and another hit song with I, which I hear in Fortnite when I get in the car in 2024, so that should tell you how successful that album was. All three rappers continued to sell well, drop hits, and critically acclaimed projects throughout the rest of the 2010s. Diving through each discography in detail could be 3 different videos, but for this one, I'm really trying to focus on why these guys are called the Big Three. I think the most effective way is to compare them head-on with some of the other artists of the era. I've already mentioned Big Sean and Wale, so we should start with them. Of the artists that I'm going to talk about, I think that Big Sean and Wale are the closest aesthetically and musically. Big Sean's release schedule aligns almost perfectly with J. Cole's in his career. They both debuted in 2011, but the difference is, Cole's debut did over 200,000 units first week, and Big Sean's Finally Famous did under 100,000. Cole's second album, Born Sinner, did almost 300,000 copies, and Big Sean's second album, Hall of Fame, did about 150,000. 2014 Forest Hills Drive did about 350,000, and Big Sean's Dark Sky Paradise did about 175,000. Cole was consistently doubling what Big Sean was doing sales-wise. Now, first of all, Big Sean's sales were really impressive. Second of all, I am not Mr. Sales, and I hate when rap arguments center around who sells more. But when it comes to defining the Big Three, if the criteria that we're using for Big Three is commercial success, then we kind of have to look at these sales. And if sales aren't your cup of tea, here's something else. We have the fact that Big Sean was opening for J. Cole on his 2014 Forest Hills Drive tour. I would know. I was there. So if there's a hierarchy here that someone has a gun to my head, the YouTube algorithm is holding a gun to my head and telling me, tell me who the Big Three rappers were, then I'm putting Cole above Sean. Cole is often cited as like the third one or maybe the weak link in the Big Three. Again, this is not my opinion, I'm just saying what I see on the internet. Because Drake has the highest sales and Kendrick is the critical darling. So it makes sense that J. Cole would be the one that I'm going to compare to these other artists. Don't kill me. I mean, I said it before, I grew up a Cole stan. So this is not based on who my personal favorite is at all. Now in the sales argument, I'm not gonna lie, what I saw from Wale kinda shocked me. He did 200K on his first album, Attention Deficit. His second album, Ambition, almost did 500K in its first week in 2011. And his album, The Gifted in 2013, did over 350,000. Those are Big Three type numbers. Anecdotally, growing up in that time period, I gotta say, it never felt like he was doing that type of numbers. What I remember the most about Wale, there's two things really. One is that man knows how to make a lead single. He knows how to make an R&B hook rap song. And that's something that you don't see as much these days because I feel like rappers are singing a lot. But like, he has an absolute penchant for that. Lotus Flower Bomb, isn't bad. You know, like there's so many. Anyway, I also always felt like he was complaining that he wasn't getting enough attention. So it's kind of crazy to see how many albums he was moving. He low-key might have been making a point. But the issue with Wale's case for the big three is that after those 3 albums, it just doesn't look the same. His 2015 album, the album About Nothing, did 138K first week. Great numbers, but not competing with the big three. And his following 3 projects didn't even crack the top 5. I think Cole has to be placed over Wale based on longevity. Their numbers are relatively comparable during their peaks. In fact, Wale was actually kind of exceeding him a little bit, but one is still going and just had their first #1 hit of their career in 2023. And that guy is not Wale. Meek Mill falls into a similar bucket as Big Sean, as he doesn't quite have the album sales to compete. An artist like Travis Scott is arguably from a different generation than these guys. His debut album came out in 2015, and Drake and Cole already had 3 studio albums, and Drake had a mixtape that was basically an album, and Kendrick had 2 albums. Late 2010 standouts like Playboi Carti, Lil Uzi Vert are definitely a different generation. Guys like Kanye and Lil Wayne, even though they were just as successful during this time period, were around a little bit too long before to be considered a part of that same generation. The real wild card here though is Nicki Minaj. Why don't people put her in the big 3? Her album sales are pretty close to J. Cole's. She's got the hits, she definitely has the diehard fan base, she has some legendary features. She's a little pop, sure, but so is Drake. Is it because she doesn't have what hip-hop purists would call a classic album? Is it plain and simple because when people hear women rapping, they kind of put it in a slightly different genre than like the boys club mainstream rap genre? Remember, this is pre-City Girls, this is pre-Cardi B, like, Nicki was kind of the only one doing it then. Pre-Meg Thee Stallion. I'm not really sure why she doesn't end up in this conversation more, because it's impossible to leave Nicki Minaj out of the conversation of 2010s hip-hop as a whole. Perhaps if we move to a Mount Rushmore style ranking, another gimmick where you're setting an arbitrary number on how many people are considered to be in the top of something, but with 4 instead of 3, then she might be included. I'm sure the Barbs were already including her though. She's the biggest omission from that conversation in my opinion. Now the best argument that I've seen for a completely different big 3 came from a tweet from a music writer that I really respect named Caleb Catlin. He said, "It was always Future, Thug, Keef, Dot. By the way, if y'all are buying into rap hierarchy and y'all tricked yourselves for over a decade thinking otherwise." He has Kendrick on that list too, so I'm gonna focus on Future, Young Thug, and Chief Keef. I actually think this is a really valid big 3 as long as you're considering a completely different criteria from the one that we've been considering. The argument for Future, Chief Keef, and Young Thug is not one based on commercial success, or critical acclaim, or tour size. It's based on influence and creativity. The trio of Drake, Kendrick, and J. Cole all play within the lines of well-established hip-hop tropes. While Drake also colors outside of them with the pop and R&B sides of his sound, he retains that lyricism and approach to rapping that can make an old head go, "Alright, I can't hate on him for this one." J. Cole is cut from an MC cloth that I feel like can be traced back through Kanye West and Pac, and Kendrick retains a ton of influence from his West Coast roots as well. While all 3 of the traditional big 3 get criticized for different things, you go on the internet and you'll see Drake get called soft, or a pop star, not a doctor, nor a rapper. Kendrick sounds like an alien, and J. Cole puts people to sleep. But at the end of the day, they aren't criticized in the same manner that Future, Young Thug, and Chief Keef all were at the beginning of their careers. And that's something that I feel like unites the latter 3, because I feel like they were all criticized for the same reason. They were being attacked for presenting new ideas. They sounded so different from everything that came before them. When Future came out, I was outside. I mean, that's not true. I was like a 14-year-old in like a high school classroom, but they were making fun of the way that he mumbles and slurs his words and uses auto-tune, because people just didn't really sound like that.
What happened? I need some auto-tune in the...
Chief Keef was so brusque and aggressive sounding that people were making fun of him or just distancing themselves from him. He was firmly an outsider, and in a lot of ways he still kind of is. Young Thug was getting laughed at for being unintelligible to the untrained ear, with people pointing at songs like Lifestyle as difficult to understand. Of course, all these criticisms aged like milk. Future inspired so many of the rappers that came after him. Now, if you watch my Kanye video, you'd see how he inspired some of the guys who came before him. Chief Keef could be considered the architect for a lot of different regional genres that are going on right now, not just in Chicago, but also like New York drill. Young Thug is arguably the forefather, if not just one of the forefathers, of the Atlanta sound that has absolutely been the zeitgeist of hip-hop for half a decade at this point. None of these guys fell off either, at least not if we're judging them off creativity and influence. Chief Keef just dropped an awesome project with Mike Will Made It that has increased my bench press in the gym. Future is on top of the world with this recent album. I mean, that Kendrick bar on his album is probably one of the reasons I'm making this video. And he's had a steady and consistent growth since his mixtape run in 2014 and 2015. Without his recent legal troubles, who knows where Young Thug would be, but probably somewhere very impressive. He's been on a consistent upswing just like Future. So what I'm really saying is that a big three is all about perspective. Make it about commercial success, and it's hard to argue against Drake, Kendrick, and J. Cole. And because they all came up together, that narrative, that story is just so fun to follow. Make it about creativity and boundary pushing and influence, and I think a big three like Chief Keef, Young Thug, and Future makes a lot of sense. The most important point though is that literally none of this is real. None of this matters. Like who you like. These don't have to be your favorite rappers, your most played rappers, or the most influential rappers if you're the one making music. Hip-hop is a big and beautiful world. Yet, the big three narrative became such a big talking point that the three rappers people put in it are talking about it on wax now. What do you guys think? Comment your big three below. Or perhaps the more spicy comment would be, tell me who shouldn't be in the big three and why. Anyways, it's HADJI. Peace.